Catherine had spent years learning that the most powerful decisions inside the royal family were rarely announced with a raised voice. They arrived quietly, after long nights, private conversations, and moments when everyone in the room understood that something had changed. And according to the version of events now circulating around the palace, Catherine made one such decision that left Queen Camilla deeply shaken. What made the moment so striking was not a public confrontation. There was no dramatic scene outside a palace gate, no angry statement released to the press, and no carefully staged exchange for cameras. Instead, the decision was reportedly made after Catherine reviewed a situation that had been troubling her for some time. She listened, watched, considered the consequences, and then chose a course that very few people around her expected. The reaction attributed to Camilla was equally unusual. The Queen is known for understanding the demands of royal life, and she has spent decades learning how to absorb uncomfortable moments without allowing them to become public spectacles. Yet the story now being discussed suggests that Catherine's decision touched something more personal than protocol. Before we go further, tell us where you are watching from. Which city are you in right now? Write your city in the comments, because we want to see how many different places are following this royal story today. And if you enjoy detailed royal updates, subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the end, because what happened after Catherine made her decision may be even more important than the decision itself. The key to understanding the moment is to look beyond the headline. Catherine's unexpected decision did not appear from nowhere. It fits into a much longer pattern involving duty, family, loyalty, and the difficult balance between a private family and a public institution. For years, Catherine has occupied one of the most unusual positions in modern royal life. She is both a member of one of Britain's most visible families and a woman who came into that world from outside its traditional aristocratic structure. Her public image has been built less around dramatic statements and more around patience, preparation, and consistency. That approach has mattered because royal life rewards restraint. A person can feel hurt, disagree with another member of the family, or question a decision, but none of those feelings can automatically become public action. Every decision carries consequences for schedules, charities, staff, public expectations, and the wider image of the monarchy. Catherine learned that environment gradually. She watched how older members of the family handled pressure. She saw how quickly a private disagreement could become a national conversation. She also learned that silence can protect a family, but silence can sometimes allow a problem to grow. That distinction appears to be at the center of this latest claim. The decision reportedly involved a boundary. Catherine was said to have reached a point where she believed that continuing with an old arrangement, simply because it had always existed, was no longer enough. She wanted clarity about what was expected, who would be involved, and where family responsibilities ended and institutional responsibilities began. This is where Camilla enters the picture. Camilla's position is different from Catherine's. She entered the royal system after a long and difficult public journey, and by the time she became queen, she had already experienced years of scrutiny. She understood that the monarchy could be unforgiving, especially when private family tensions became visible. That may explain why Catherine's decision reportedly affected her so deeply. The issue was not simply about one meeting or one invitation. It was about what the decision seemed to represent. Catherine was no longer simply adapting herself to an established structure. She was, according to the account, asking whether that structure needed to adapt to the next generation as well. That is a very different kind of question, and inside an institution built on continuity, questions about change can be more uncomfortable than open arguments. The first signs of tension were subtle. There was no single public incident that clearly announced a break. Instead, people around the family would have noticed small changes, a different approach to scheduling, a different pattern of communication, or a decision being discussed more carefully than before. Those details are easy to dismiss when viewed separately. Royal households are complicated. Plans change, events are moved, people have competing responsibilities. A missed meeting does not automatically mean a disagreement, but when several small changes begin pointing in the same direction, observers naturally begin asking whether something larger is happening. Catherine's position made that especially sensitive. She was not simply another relative, she was part of the future leadership of the institution. Any decision she made about family boundaries could eventually affect how the next generation interacted with the wider royal household. That meant the decision had to be considered carefully. According to the story circulating around the situation, Catherine did not rush. She discussed the matter privately with William and considered what would happen if she went ahead. She understood that the easiest option would have been to continue as before. That would have created less immediate discomfort. But the easiest option was not necessarily the right one. Catherine reportedly chose clarity over convenience. That phrase matters because it explains why the story has attracted so much attention. A dramatic confrontation can be dismissed as emotion. A calm decision made after careful thought is harder to dismiss. It suggests intention. And intention is precisely what makes royal decisions consequential. William is also important here. He has spent much of his adult life balancing his role as a son with his responsibilities as the future king. When Catherine makes a significant decision, he cannot treat it as an isolated personal choice. He has to consider how it affects their partnership, their children, and the institution they are preparing to lead. People close to royal life often describe William and Catherine as a team. That does not mean they agree about everything. It means that when they face difficult situations, they tend to think about the long-term consequences rather than the immediate headline. In this case, the reported decision appears to have followed that pattern. Catherine was not said to be seeking a public victory over Camilla. She was not trying to humiliate the Queen. Instead, the decision reportedly communicated something much simpler. Certain matters would now be handled differently. For Camilla, that change may have felt like a loss of control over a system she had spent years learning to navigate, and that is where the tears in the headline become important. A royal disagreement does not always look like a disagreement. Sometimes it looks like a calendar change. Sometimes it looks like a meeting that is suddenly moved. Sometimes it looks like a family member choosing not to attend an occasion that once would have been automatic. The absence of drama can actually make a decision more powerful. Catherine understood that. Her public career has been shaped by a style that rarely depends on confrontation. She tends to allow actions to speak before words do. That makes it difficult for observers to know exactly when a boundary has been crossed. The story suggests that the boundary in this case involved the way family matters were being handled around the next generation. Catherine has always been protective of her children. That is hardly unusual for a parent, but royal parenting has additional layers. The children are not simply private children. They are also part of the succession and will eventually carry responsibilities of their own. That creates a complicated question. How much of their upbringing should be shaped by tradition, and how much should remain grounded in the family environment their parents believe is healthiest? Different generations of the royal family have answered that question differently. Catherine and William have generally appeared determined to give their children a sense of normality where possible. They have allowed ordinary family experiences to coexist with formal royal obligations. They have also tried to protect the children from becoming characters in every royal disagreement. That approach can sometimes clash with older expectations. Camilla, meanwhile, represents a different generation and a different experience of royal life. Her understanding of duty was formed during a period when the institution placed enormous emphasis on hierarchy, formality, and the preservation of established customs. Neither approach is automatically right or wrong. The difficulty begins when both approaches are applied to the same family without a clear agreement. That appears to be what Catherine wanted to change. The decision, according to the account, was not a rejection of tradition. It was a demand for a clearer line between tradition and control. That distinction reportedly surprised Camilla. It may also explain why the reaction was emotional rather than angry. Camilla could understand a disagreement. She could understand criticism. What may have been harder was realizing that Catherine had quietly reached a conclusion without needing permission to reach it. For someone who had spent years navigating the royal institution, that could feel like a turning point. The Queen was no longer dealing only with a younger member of the family learning the rules. She was dealing with the woman who would eventually help define what those rules meant for the next generation. The moment itself was reportedly private. That is important because many details now circulating online should not be treated as confirmed fact. There has been no official announcement establishing the dramatic version of events, and there is no reliable public record proving that Camilla literally broke down because of Catherine's decision. What can be examined is the broader dynamic behind the claim. Imagine a private meeting in which Catherine explains that she has thought carefully about the future. She does not arrive looking for a fight, she does not raise her voice. She simply explains that certain decisions concerning her family will now be approached differently. For Camilla, the meaning would be immediate. The younger generation was setting its own boundary. Catherine's message, in this account, was not that Camilla had no place in the family. It was that her role could not automatically determine every decision involving Catherine's household. That is a significant difference. It also reflects a larger change in the monarchy. The royal family is constantly balancing inherited expectations with modern public life. The public expects members to respect tradition, but it also expects them to behave like real families. It wants ceremony without coldness, duty without emotional distance, and continuity without the appearance of being trapped in the past. Catherine has become particularly associated with that balance. Her approach is often measured. She does not appear eager to dismantle tradition. Instead, she seems more interested in making tradition workable for the world in which the monarchy now operates. That may be why her decision reportedly carried such weight. She was not saying that the old system was worthless, she was saying that the old system could not answer every new problem. For Camilla, hearing that from Catherine may have brought several emotions together at once. There could have been disappointment, because a familiar arrangement was changing. There could have been concern, because changes made by future leaders eventually affect everyone. There could also have been something more personal. The realization that Catherine had become confident enough to make a decision that once might have required years of negotiation. That realization can be painful. It can also be necessary. The story becomes even more interesting when we consider what happened next. After the decision, the expected royal drama did not arrive. There was no public statement from Catherine. There was no statement from William criticizing anyone. Camilla did not publicly respond. The palace continued with its schedule, and yet, according to the narrative surrounding the event, the atmosphere inside the family changed. This is one of the most believable aspects of the story, because royal families rarely respond to private disagreements with immediate public declarations. They have institutions designed to absorb tension quietly. The question is what happens underneath that silence. If Catherine's decision was genuinely about establishing a new boundary, then the real consequence would not be visible in one afternoon. It would appear gradually, through choices about access, scheduling, family gatherings, communication, and the way decisions were made. That is where the story of what happened next becomes more interesting than the original decision. Catherine reportedly became more deliberate about where she invested her time. Instead of trying to make every relationship comfortable, she focused on keeping her immediate family stable. William supported that approach, at least in the version of events being discussed. This did not mean that he turned against Camilla. That distinction matters. Royal family stories often become exaggerated because people assume that one person's boundary must automatically be another person's defeat. Real family relationships are rarely that simple. William can respect Camilla while supporting Catherine. Catherine can disagree with Camilla without hating her. Camilla can feel hurt without becoming an enemy. The palace can change a practice without announcing that anyone has lost. The most consequential changes are often the ones that do not create obvious winners and losers. That may be exactly what happened here. Camilla's reported tears, if the account is accurate, may have been less about losing a battle and more about recognizing that a familiar relationship had entered a new phase. For years, Catherine had been learning the institution. Now the institution was beginning to learn Catherine. There is another reason this story resonates. Catherine's decision can be understood as part of a generational transition. The monarchy is always moving toward a future that has not yet arrived. Older members preserve memory. Middle generations carry responsibility. Younger members prepare to inherit the institution. Those roles naturally create tension. Camilla has spent years helping stabilize the monarchy during a period of enormous change. Her own path into royal life was difficult, and she had to develop an unusually strong ability to survive public criticism. Catherine's journey has been different. She entered the royal family as a young woman and gradually built her position through years of public service. Her transformation was not sudden, it happened through repetition. One engagement, one speech, one charity visit, one family appearance at a time. That long process gave her something more valuable than a title. It gave her confidence. Confidence inside the monarchy is powerful because it changes the way a person responds to pressure. A newcomer asks what is allowed. An experienced royal asks what is necessary. Catherine is now much closer to the second position. That is why a decision that might once have been treated as a personal preference can now have institutional meaning. If she decides that a particular family practice needs to change, people will pay attention because they know she will eventually have a much greater role in determining how the monarchy operates. Camilla would understand that better than most. She knows what it means to enter a system with established rules. She also knows what it feels like when those rules are questioned. The irony is that both women may actually want the same broad thing, a monarchy capable of surviving the future. Their disagreement may be about how to get there. Camilla's instinct may be to protect continuity. Catherine's instinct may be to protect adaptability. Neither instinct is inherently destructive, but when they collide, someone has to decide which priority comes first. According to the story, Catherine did. And that is what made the moment so unexpected. The next stage was not confrontation, it was adjustment. Catherine reportedly began treating the new boundary as normal rather than dramatic. That may sound small, but it is often how permanent changes become permanent. If you constantly announce a boundary, you make it a conflict. If you simply live by it, you make it a rule. That appears to have been Catherine's approach. She did not repeatedly remind people of her decision. She did not use public appearances to send coded messages. She simply continued with her responsibilities and allowed the new arrangement to become part of everyday life. William followed the same principle. Their public appearances remained professional. Their charitable work continued. Their family commitments remained visible. Nothing suggested that the monarchy was collapsing. That was precisely the point. Catherine's decision was not designed to damage the institution. It was designed to protect the family inside it. This is where the emotional reaction attributed to Camilla becomes more understandable. If she truly became tearful, the reason may not have been humiliation. It may have been the emotional recognition that the family was changing around her. That can be painful even when the change is necessary. There is also a human side that gets lost in royal coverage. Camilla is not only a queen. Catherine is not only a future queen. They are women connected through marriage, family, and years of public life. Their relationship exists beneath the titles. A decision made by one can affect the other emotionally, even when neither has done anything wrong. That is why the most interesting interpretation of this story is not that Catherine defeated Camilla, it is that Catherine grew into a position where she no longer needed to define herself through Camilla's approval. That is a much more important development. And it may be the reason the palace reacted so carefully. Then came the part nobody expected. Rather than widening the distance, the decision reportedly created the possibility of a more honest relationship. Once a boundary is clear, people know where they stand. Before that, everyone can operate through assumptions. One person assumes access, another assumes authority. A third assumes tradition will settle the matter. Those assumptions can produce resentment. A clear boundary removes the uncertainty. If Catherine's decision forced that clarity, it may eventually have helped both women. Camilla could understand what Catherine expected. Catherine could understand what Camilla was willing to respect. William could stop acting as the bridge between two sides of the family every time a disagreement appeared. That would be a meaningful change. It would also explain why the story did not end with a public feud. The strongest royal relationships are not necessarily the ones without disagreements. They are the ones in which disagreements can be absorbed without destroying the wider family. That is a difficult skill. The royal family has had to develop it repeatedly. Catherine's reported decision may therefore be less about conflict and more about maturity. She recognized that avoiding discomfort forever can create a deeper problem. Sometimes the kindest decision is the one that makes everyone uncomfortable for a short time, so that a healthier relationship can exist later. That is not dramatic. It is simply difficult. And difficult decisions often look shocking only because people have become accustomed to silence. There is also a wider public lesson in the reaction. Royal audiences have become used to headlines suggesting that one member has humiliated another. Every disagreement becomes a battle. Every photograph becomes evidence. Every expression becomes a supposed message. But real royal life is usually more complicated. A person can look serious because they are tired. A person can avoid another person because they are following a schedule. A private meeting can be routine, and a reported emotional reaction may have a completely different cause from the one suggested by a headline. That is why this story should be understood as a reported narrative rather than established fact. The public can discuss the possible meaning without pretending to know private conversations that have never been officially confirmed. What is undeniable is the broader shift in Catherine's position. She is no longer simply adapting to royal expectations. She is increasingly part of the generation that will shape them, that makes her decisions worth watching. It also means that future disagreements may not look like the disagreements of previous decades. The next generation has grown up in a world where privacy is difficult, public expectations are immediate, and the monarchy must constantly explain its relevance. Catherine understands that environment. She has also seen what happens when private family matters become public narratives. Her instinct appears to be to reduce unnecessary drama rather than feed it. That makes the reported decision even more interesting, because the most powerful move may have been the refusal to turn it into a spectacle. And then there is Camilla's side. For someone who has spent decades being judged, a moment of emotional vulnerability can be especially significant. If the reports about tears are accurate, they should not automatically be interpreted as weakness. Tears can mean disappointment. They can mean relief. They can mean the end of a period of uncertainty. They can mean that a person finally understands how someone else has been feeling. In the context of Catherine's decision, the most compelling interpretation is that Camilla realized the relationship had changed. Perhaps she understood that Catherine was not rejecting her personally. Perhaps she recognized that the younger generation needed more independence. Perhaps she saw that some old habits were no longer sustainable. Or perhaps the emotion came from something much simpler, the realization that time was moving forward. Royal families are unusual because generations remain publicly connected for decades. A queen can watch a future queen grow from a young woman into an experienced leader. That transition can be emotional. Camilla knows what it means to arrive at a new stage of royal life. Catherine is now approaching her own. The decision may therefore represent a passing of responsibility, rather than a rejection of authority. Camilla's role is to help preserve the institution as it exists. Catherine's emerging role is to help prepare it for what comes next. Those responsibilities can overlap. They can also conflict. The healthiest outcome is not for one woman to defeat the other. It is for both to understand where their responsibilities begin and end. What happened next, according to the story, was surprisingly quiet. The family continued. Engagements went ahead. Children remained at the center of family life. Public appearances continued to show the familiar royal image, but behind the scenes, a new understanding had reportedly taken shape. Catherine was more confident in her boundaries. Camilla was more aware of them. William was less trapped between competing expectations, and the institution itself had been reminded that the future cannot be managed entirely through old habits. That is perhaps the most important part of the entire narrative. A monarchy survives not because nothing changes. It survives because it learns how to change without losing its identity. Catherine's unexpected decision, whether every detail of the circulating account proves accurate or not, represents exactly that tension. Tradition versus adaptation. Family versus institution. Privacy versus public duty. Experience versus a new generation. Those tensions will not disappear. They are built into royal life. What changes is how the people inside the system respond to them. Catherine's response, as described in this story, was to make a decision quietly and stand by it. Camilla's response was reportedly emotional because the decision forced a new reality into view. And William's role was to support the family without turning the situation into a public battle. That is not the kind of ending that produces fireworks, but it may be the kind that changes a family for years. There is one final detail that deserves attention. Catherine reportedly did not ask for recognition after making the decision. She did not need a headline saying she had won. She did not need Camilla to publicly admit defeat. She needed the new boundary to be respected. That is a very different objective. Power inside a family is often measured by who can force the other person to acknowledge them. Maturity is measured by whether acknowledgement is even necessary. Catherine's reported choice suggests the second. She made the decision because she believed it was necessary for the future, not because she wanted applause in the present. That may be why the story has continued to attract attention. People recognize the emotional force of a person who stops asking for permission to protect what matters to them. At the same time, the story does not require Camilla to be the villain. The Queen has her own history, her own pressures, and her own understanding of duty. If she was hurt, that does not make her cruel. If Catherine set a boundary, that does not make her disloyal. Both things can be true at the same time. And perhaps that is what happened next. Not a royal war, not a palace collapse, not a dramatic transfer of power. Something more ordinary and more difficult. Two people adjusting to a new understanding of one another that may be less sensational than the headline, but it is far more revealing about how royal families actually survive. In the end, the most unexpected part of Catherine's decision may not have been the decision itself. It may have been what the decision revealed about her. For years, Catherine was watched as someone preparing to become a senior royal. People examined her clothes, speeches, expressions, and movements. They asked whether she could handle pressure, and whether she could fit comfortably into an institution built over centuries. She answered those questions slowly, not with one dramatic moment, with years of consistency. The woman who once had to learn the rules now has enough experience to question which rules still serve the family. That is a significant transformation. Camilla has undergone a transformation of her own. She went from being one of the most controversial figures surrounding the monarchy to becoming a central part of its public identity. Both women know what it means to be judged. Both have survived periods when public opinion seemed impossible to control. Both understand that the monarchy is larger than any individual, and perhaps that shared experience is what gives this story a path forward. The decision may have caused tears, it may have caused discomfort, it may have forced difficult conversations, but if it also created clearer boundaries and more honest expectations, then the consequences could eventually prove constructive. The royal family does not need everyone to agree. It needs people to understand what their disagreements mean and how to prevent those disagreements from becoming permanent damage. Catherine's unexpected decision may have done exactly that, and if the reports are even partly accurate, what happened next was not the collapse of a relationship. It was the beginning of a different one. So what should viewers take from this? First, the dramatic details circulating online should be treated carefully. Claims about private royal conversations, tears, secret meetings, or hidden decisions are often impossible to verify from public information. Second, the broader question is real and worth discussing. How will the next generation of the monarchy balance tradition with a more modern approach to family life? Catherine's position makes that question unavoidable. She will eventually carry responsibilities that require her to understand both the institution and the people living inside it. That means she cannot simply reject tradition, but she also cannot allow tradition to become an excuse for avoiding necessary change. Camilla's generation faced a different monarchy. Catherine's generation is preparing for another. The transition between those worlds will sometimes be uncomfortable. There will be disagreements. There will be emotional moments. There will be decisions that surprise people who believed the old way would continue forever. But that is how institutions evolve. Perhaps the tears attributed to Camilla were not a sign that Catherine had won. Perhaps they were a sign that both women understood something had changed. And perhaps what happened next was the most important part. Instead of allowing the change to become a permanent fracture, the family chose to continue working, continue meeting, continue serving, and continue learning where the new boundaries belonged. That is how quiet decisions become lasting changes. Not through noise, through repetition, not through humiliation, through clarity, not through public victory, through private resolve. For Catherine, the decision was reportedly about one thing above all else: protecting the future without destroying the present. That is a difficult line to walk. She could not change the monarchy overnight. She could not erase decades of tradition. She could not control what every commentator said. She could control one thing: the way she responded. She chose carefully, she chose privately, and she reportedly chose a path that allowed her family to remain united, while still establishing a new expectation. That is why the phrase "unexpected decision" fits the story so well. The surprise was not that Catherine disagreed. The surprise was that she acted. For Camilla, the emotional reaction may have been a moment of recognition. The future had arrived a little earlier than expected. The younger generation was no longer waiting outside the room, it was already inside, making decisions. And that is the real shift. Catherine does not need to defeat Camilla to become influential. She does not need to replace her. She does not need to publicly challenge her. She only needs to continue building credibility through the way she handles responsibility. Over time, that kind of influence becomes difficult to ignore. The palace may not announce when power moves. It rarely does. Power moves through trust, experience, responsibility, and the ability to make decisions when no perfect option exists. Catherine is now at that stage. Camilla knows it, William knows it, and the public is beginning to see it too. There is also something quietly human about the entire situation. Behind every title is a person trying to navigate relationships. Behind every palace wall is a family dealing with ordinary emotions in an extraordinary environment. Jealousy, disappointment, pride, fear, affection, and hope do not disappear because someone becomes royal. They simply become harder to express. That is why boundaries matter. Without them, private resentment can grow. With them, people at least know what is expected. Catherine's reported decision may have been uncomfortable, precisely because it brought an unspoken issue into the open. Camilla may have felt hurt. William may have felt caught between loyalties. Other family members may have wondered what the decision meant for them. But uncertainty is often more damaging than discomfort. Once the new expectation was clear, everyone could adjust. That appears to be what happened next. The family moved forward, not perfectly, not without emotion, but forward, and perhaps that is the lesson hidden beneath the sensational headline. A strong family is not one in which nobody ever makes a difficult decision. It is one in which difficult decisions do not automatically become permanent wars. Catherine's choice, if the account is accurate, did not end the royal family's ability to work together. It forced the family to rethink how it worked together. That is a much more meaningful outcome. As the attention around the story fades, the real consequences would not be measured by one emotional moment. They would be measured months later. Would communication become clearer? Would family boundaries become more respected? Would William and Catherine feel less pressure to manage competing expectations? Would Camilla feel that her role remained valued even as the next generation gained greater independence? Those are the questions that matter. A headline can tell us that someone was shocked. A lasting change tells us why, and that is why what happened next is more important than the moment itself. If Catherine truly made the decision described in this narrative, then she did something every future leader eventually has to do. She chose what she believed was necessary even though she knew someone she respected might be disappointed. That is not easy. It is especially difficult inside a family, but leadership often begins where the desire to keep everyone happy ends. Catherine's challenge will be to make that leadership compatible with compassion. Camilla's challenge will be to recognize that the monarchy she helped protect cannot remain exactly as it was. William's challenge will be to stand between generations without becoming trapped between them. And the institution's challenge will be to allow the future to develop without treating every change as a threat. If those challenges are handled well, the emotional moment that reportedly left Camilla in tears could eventually become something very different. It could become the moment when an old pattern finally changed. That is where this story leaves us. Not with a palace in chaos, not with a royal family divided into permanent camps, but with a question about the future. Catherine's unexpected decision has been described as a moment of defiance, but it may be better understood as a moment of confidence. She knew what mattered to her, she knew what the consequences could be, and she acted anyway. Camilla's reported reaction adds an emotional layer, but it should not erase the larger picture. Two generations of royal women are navigating an institution that demands both continuity and change. Sometimes those demands collide. When they do, the answer cannot always be another compromise that postpones the problem. Sometimes someone has to make a decision. Catherine reportedly did, and what happened next was not the explosion many expected. It was quieter. Conversations changed, expectations changed, boundaries became clearer, and the family continued. That may be the most royal ending of all, because the monarchy has always survived by absorbing difficult moments and finding a way to move forward. The question now is whether this new generation can do that without repeating the mistakes of the past. Catherine's decision may be one early sign of the answer, and if there is one thing this story makes clear, it is that the most important royal changes do not always happen under the cameras. Sometimes they happen in a quiet room, when one person finally decides that the old way is no longer enough. Thank you for watching. If you found this royal update interesting, make sure you subscribe to Royal Unbeatable and stay connected for the next major development. And if you have not already, tell us your city in the comments. We want to know where you are watching from today. What do you think Catherine's decision really meant? Was it a necessary boundary, a sign of a changing monarchy, or simply a private family matter that should never have become a public story? Share your view below. Until the next update, stay informed, stay thoughtful, and remember that behind every royal headline, there is usually a much more complicated human story. One final point is worth remembering. It is the pattern that follows. If Catherine's choice set a clear boundary, its meaning will soon appear through the best way the family communicates, shares responsibility, and protects its private life. Camilla's response will matter also, because acceptance of change can be as significant as the decision that creates it. Whatever the truth behind the details, the wider question remains: can an institution built on centuries of tradition make room for a generation that wants to preserve its values while changing the way those values are lived? That question will not be answered in one afternoon. It will be answered quietly through the decisions that follow.